adventure was coming to an end, and Claudia didn't want to.
Yeah, she was still...
Why'd you tell him? And he was
right.
like, what are we going to do? We don't have any money anymore.
Which goes to, again, his practicality,
Yeah.
like you're saying, like he sees it coming, and she still stubbornly, won't relent to that. So.
Right.
And then it was sweet afterwards when they called her grandmother. They said they would kind of adopt her as their grandmother.
I love that. They were already starting their plans of how they were going to go to visit her again, but without telling their parents.
Right.
They got a kid to go see her.
And they wanted it to be a secret. They were like, she can't know that we're going to adopt her as our grandma. Because they need some kind of secret. They need some kind of
Well, and it's like this adventure has them bonded forever. And,
yeah, totally. I loved it. I loved it. I had a personal connection to that because my brother's exactly that much younger than me, and we have a special relationship, to say the least. So speaking of Mrs. Frankweiler, that brings me to my third question, which is, actually this is something at the end of the book. So do you want to continue your summary, and then this has to do with like the last.
I can go on. Basically, just I guess from where it was, they see Angel. They're trying to learn about Angel and find out if Michelangelo really was the artist. They'd gone to the museum. They realized, one night when they had to take their bath in the fountain, they found more money, so that helped.
I love that
Favorite
illustration
part.
too.
When they're in the fountain, they find their money and all those
part.
wishes that they were spending. Little part of me was thinking, every time I threw a coin into a fountain and made a wish, they stole the money. And
And what's Claudia was they called it a petticoat sometimes, didn't they? That she had to slip on, and she didn't want to. She was nervous about changing, and then you see her and she's in her birthday suit.
Yeah.
I thought that was funny.
Let me
she's giving it
share
out,
real
giving
quick.
it
This
out.
was one of my connections,
Sure.
text to self. When I read about the two kids taking a bath in the fountain and finding the money, I remember going to the mall at Oxmoor as a kid and throwing money into the fountain. I remember thinking as a kid that it would be cool to get all of that money. It was all so close, just sitting there in plain view. Every kid already has to fight the temptation to get in the water of the fountain in the first place. Put money in there and it becomes like candy sprinkles on an ice cream cone.
Right.
That's cute.
Totally.
That's
One of
good.
those, yeah, I see that. Like I go there and I throw money in the fountain at Oxmoor. Well, my kids do. I always have to have a collection of pennies because they want to throw coins in there. But I'm all the time trying to pull them out because after they throw it all, they're like, "Why can't you just scoop some more out of here and they throw
Do it
more
again."
in?" I'm like, "No, we can't get in the fountain." But that is, I mean, it was like they're going to take a bath, which most kids don't enjoy doing. But because they're in the fountain, they find the money. It just makes it that much more fun.
And that's why she's such a good, well, I hope it's a she. I never looked into that. E.L. Konigsberg.
Oh, I don't know.
I was just guessing it was because she's related to Claudia.
It is a
so,
she.
Yeah.
Good. That makes me happy. I was just talking about how I hate finding out when artists or authors that I believe are females end up being males. I don't know, that's just me. But I think she's so good at choosing things that children, like you're saying, have that notion of, it would be very indulgent. They don't think like that, but in those terms, but it would just be very indulgent child behavior to do the things that Claudia and Jamie get to do in the book. And the fact that she honed in on those and presented them in such a natural, story that is so believable. That this is in our realistic fiction, isn't it?
Yes.
Realistic fiction category. It is so real, and that's why I think that's part of why I identified with it so much, because I was never a fantasy child. And it's like today, I love reality television, I love my nonfiction books, I like realistic fiction. For me, it felt real enough that I imagined that this could happen.
Yes, and there are real, not that there aren't real emotions in fantasy books, but there are really real emotions that
The psychological and emotional.
And I think it's funny when
connection.
you're talking about how they were indulgent when they were there, because I think that might be something that appeals to children, and it appealed to me when I first read this as a child. Is, even in the museum when they slept in that bed, there was the sign that said, "Do not step up on platform," and yet they climb right in and sleep in the bed. And there have been so many times where I've been places and I see the things behind the velvet rope, and I just want to touch it.
Right.
Be quiet, don't touch,
Yes.
don't do this,
You want
don't
to do
that,
it because
and
you know
they
you're
get
not
to do it
supposed
all.
to. They're doing that. They're in the fountain getting the money. They're over the
to
road.
go eat at restaurants.
I will
Choose their
tell you
own,
though,
and drinking
that was-
coffee. That was so New York of them. I
Yes.
feel like
And
that's
then-
so.
and-
Eating like dinner
and
food
I
for
will
breakfast.
say,
Yeah.
one thing that I thought I found interesting too though, is they paid for every meal. And I was thinking, when you're in the museum and it's closed, surely there's some way to get back there.
And this
in
was
my mind,
in
I'm
the
thinking,
70s. I'm
I'm
sure
like,
they're
they
not
could just get
bar-
in there and find
And
food
get
or
it.
something, but it's like, they
the
were,
one thing is they stole the newspaper, right?
yes, and I think.
Well, I mean, they were
and-
breaking and entering the whole time, but it's funny.
But I mean, it's one of those things, it's like they don't see an issue with being in the museum after hours or even taking the money from the fountain, because it's like it was just from the fountain. But they paid for every meal, they paid, but I mean, they still had to follow those rules, like they made sure they did their laundry, they made sure they took a
Yeah,
bath.
they were well
That's
brought
what
up.
They
I
brushed
loved
their
about it,
teeth,
because
it's
I
like
was a
they
real
still-
OCD child. I mean, I
You're
remember.
like, me too, I would be doing
Oh, well, see, I
that.
was thinking, like, if I ran away, I would be running away so that I didn't have to do laundry, so that I
Oh,
didn't have
Right,
to
I
take the
probably
bath,
would have
so
been
that I
crusty
didn't
by
have
the
to
end
do
of the
Oh my
adventure.
gosh.
Well, and I wouldn't have eaten the healthy food, I would have been eating like the candy bars and.
Oh, I would
the
have been
junk
making
food,
my
like-
brother change his underwear too. You know, like as a kid, I loved like when my mom would wash our sheets and we would have clean laundry, so I could put clean pajamas on. I always make sure to take a shower before I go to bed because I loved like
Clean
being
on,
clean
clean
and
on,
having
clean.
yeah.
Yes.
That I definitely related to that, and that was my favorite
Oh,
part of the
see, I
camp
would've
reading this
been
book: the laundry,
different.
the bath.
Oh, and I was like the opposite. I would have been like, I would not have spent my time doing that. I wouldn't have tried to learn anything. I would have been like peeking in. I would have been trying to find the secrets of the people that worked there, not the secrets
Right,
of
right,
artifacts
right.
in the museum. But yeah.
Another,
Oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
I was just, another thought I had with the realistic things that could really happen is I think, or at least for me, but every kid probably has a fantasy that their school's on a field trip somewhere and everybody else has to follow the rules and you can go wherever
Oh, I
you
know.
want.
That's
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
You can go off on your own.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember
and
trying to
those
sneak
things-
away from field trip groups when I was a kid, like to
Oh.
do your own thing or
They rein you back in.
yeah.
And it didn't seem, forced. Like, again, that was a credit to the author. Like, when they run into their school trip, I mean, you buy it, you believe it. It doesn't feel contrived. And the one thing
and it
that
made sense because wasn't it Jamie's class that was on the
Yes.
field trip, and Claudia knew about the museum because of a field trip that her class had
That's right.
taken, and she's older, so it just kind of falls in.
nicely woven.
Yes.
I think the one thing as an adult reader that I thought felt contrived, which is what you brought up before we had the camera on, was about the grandfather, the tax
Yes.
attorney, being the grandfather, and
What are the chances of
Saxonburg,
that?
right?
Yes.
Is that, okay, so what are the chances of that? And there was no other prior connection to that, so it seemed like more of a literary device, really, like to make this story come full circle.
Well, and something that I just thought of now is they talk about the angel statue, and they talk about the face, and how Claudia thought it looked like a member of her family. And so that was something that I thought of later on. I remember when I was reading it, that they say, even from the files that they find later, that it's supposed to be accurately like a Michelangelo statue. But then it made me wonder, if Angel was supposed to be like a statue of someone from her family from like
Well,
way
she
back,
thought
or she just
herself,
had that
right?
connection. Yes.
That's when she's really starting to come into her own, like, that's a beautiful statue, like, what, do you think it looks like anyone? And Jamie's clueless, he's just
Yeah.
the younger brother, like,
And he's
what are
like,
you
what do
talking
you mean
about?
you want to hug it, you idiot?
Yeah,
You're so
hug
stupid.
it, well, that's as stupid as hugging it, she's, but what a good story that can make you, the reader,
Yeah.
start to weave your own.
Well, and I had wondered,
tangent.
with her grandfather being the tax attorney, then I always wondered, was there maybe some more